The camera flickered to life, illuminating a bare room with dim, industrial lighting. Concrete walls, cold and silent, pressed in on the lone figure bound to a wooden chair in the center of the frame. She was gagged, wrists tied behind her back, her eyes wide with panic, darting between the screen before her and the looming shadow in the doorway. "Welcome back, dear viewers," a voice drawled from behind the lens. The sound was smooth, hypnotic, but with an undercurrent of something far more sinister. "Tonight, you decide. Shall we begin?" A quick zoom in on the woman's face, the raw fear etched across her features, her breath shallow, shoulders quivering. But no pleas. Not yet. The audience didn't need them. They could see everything in her trembling lips, the rapid rise and fall of her chest. The feed switched to a live chat window, comments flooding in faster than the screen could process. "Make it slow. Start with the fingers. Let's see her scream." A hand emerged from the shadow, placing a gleaming knife on the table beside her. The chat went wild, hundreds of votes cast in seconds. The result? Slow. With deliberate, almost gentle precision, the masked figure moved behind her, lifting the blade to the soft, vulnerable skin of her neck. Her eyes squeezed shut as the cold steel grazed her flesh, just enough to draw a single drop of blood, a warning of what was to come. "Let's start here," he whispered almost tenderly, as the blade slid down her shoulder to her hand. She didn't scream, not yet, but her teeth clenched, the veins in her neck taut like cables ready to snap. The first cut came, across the knuckle of her index finger, a shallow gash, a drop of blood. The screen zoomed in again to capture the audience's prize, that split second when the pain hit and her body jolted. The audience savored it. Her agony was their entertainment. "Take them one by one," the top comment urged. The figure obliged, lifting the knife again. He didn't hurry. He let them watch. They wanted suffering, not death. Not yet. Each slice was slow, careful, and precise, as if he were an artist, and she his canvas. A moan escaped her throat, muffled by the gag as the skin peeled back, revealing raw pink tissue underneath. Her breath quickened, eyes wide, filling with tears she refused to let fall. "Shall we stop?" the voice asked, his gaze flickering to the screen where the viewers cast their votes. "No." 2,000 miles away, in a dark bedroom lit only by the glow of a laptop screen, a man leaned forward, eyes glazed. His pulse quickened with every move of the knife, fingers shaking as he typed his next command. Tear the nails off. He wasn't alone. The live chat buzzed with excitement, each vote a ripple in a tidal wave of depravity. Some laughed, others screamed their approval, but one thing was constant: the audience was in control. They were the directors of this horror show, and they were ravenous for more. On screen, the figure obeyed. The woman's eyes shot open as the pliers appeared, gleaming in the dim light. She tried to pull her hands away, but the bindings held firm. A strangled sob fought past the gag as the first nail was seized and torn away with a sickening crunch. The chat went wild again, emojis flooding the screen, egging him on. She was breaking. The steady rise and fall of her breath had become erratic, ragged. Her body twitched involuntarily now, trying to flee the pain that surrounded her. But her eyes still fought, still begged for mercy that would never come, not from the audience. Her torturer stood before her, a grotesque smile beneath his mask. "Well, folks, we're almost there. Time for the grand finale. You decide, does she leave in one piece, or do we split the difference?" The chat exploded in a frenzy. Some wanted her to die slow, some fast. But the most popular option, the one that won, was the one that turned even more stomachs. Both. He nodded slowly, turning back to her. The audience has spoken. The knife gleamed again as it was raised high. She let out a muffled scream, her body shaking violently against the restraints, her eyes rolling back. And then, silence. The camera lingered on the aftermath, broadcasting every last moment until the screen went black. In homes scattered across the world, viewers closed their laptops, their pulses still racing, some exhilarated, others numb. They would return tomorrow to vote again, to see the next victim's fate decided in the same cold, detached manner. But in the quiet moments after the show, behind the safety of their screens, a darker truth gnawed at them, one they could not ignore. They were no longer just spectators, they were participants. And in the next episode, maybe they wouldn't be so far from the action. The camera feed flickered off, but not before catching a fleeting shot of the woman's lifeless body. The chat, still a hurricane of excitement, continued to buzz for minutes after, discussing every detail of the show. But in the control room, a different conversation was happening. Behind the lens, the masked figure removed his hood. His face, middle-aged and severe, seemed at odds with the gore he had just inflicted. He leaned back in his chair, scanning the rows of monitors that displayed hundreds of darkened rooms, each one showing a different viewer, lit only by the glow of their screens. He didn't smile. His eyes hardened as he watched them, taking notes of their behavior, their votes, the moments they lingered. "Do you see?" A voice echoed through the room, a voice not his own. The man didn't flinch. "I see. Good. You know what happens next," the voice said. He nodded. He knew what was coming, but this time it wasn't part of the script. He glanced at the main monitor, where a countdown appeared. 24 hours. The clock had started ticking. Chapter 7. The Vote No One Sees. In their homes, across countries and time zones, viewers were unaware of the shift. The feed they thought had ended began again, but this time the stream was hidden. It was sent only to those who had engaged the most, those who had voted the most times for violence, for the long, drawn-out suffering. The top viewer, the man who had typed, "Tear the nails off," smiled to himself as his screen flickered back on. A live feed. But this time, it wasn't the woman in the chair. It was him, his living room, his face, staring back at him from his laptop screen. He blinked, confused, then scrambled to close the window. But it stayed, frozen on his own reflection. A slow, eerie laugh filled his headphones. "Welcome, dear viewer. This time they decide for you." The viewer's hands began to shake. He could hear his own breathing, shallow and quick, as a new chat box opened below the feed. He recognized the names from the earlier stream, thousands of viewers, but now he was their entertainment. The votes began rolling in before he could think to move. Start with the fingers. Make it slow. Let's see him scream. Chapter 8. A Decision Deferred. Back in the control room, the man behind the camera watched as the countdown neared its end. He knew what it meant. It wasn't just about the next victim. This time, the audience wasn't merely watching, they were implicated. Every vote they cast, every act of brutality they endorsed was being logged. Every keystroke, every IP address, tracked. But the true master behind the voice had a different endgame. This wasn't about just feeding sadistic tendencies anymore. It was about control over the viewers, over their lives. The masked man was just the puppet, a facilitator for something far darker that had been growing behind the scenes. The countdown blinked, 5 seconds. As the seconds ticked away, the final twist became clear. Each viewer, from the most active to the most passive, would soon receive their own stream. And in that moment, they would realize one horrific truth. They were all now part of the show. The next victim, the next viewer's choice, would be chosen from among them. Chapter 9. Cliffhanger. The screen went black as the final second disappeared. Then a single line of text appeared. Your turn. The cameras in their home switched on, unnoticed until now, capturing their reactions, their fear. One by one, their faces appeared on a new live feed. But this time, no one was voting. The masked figure stood up, staring at the new rows of monitors, waiting. The voice echoed again, colder this time. Who will they choose next? The clock had hit 0. The screen remained dark for an agonizing minute, the sound of static humming through speakers across the globe. In thousands of homes, viewers sat frozen, their faces illuminated only by the glow of their own reflections, the reality of what was happening sinking in. And then, the broadcast returned. But it wasn't from the control room. This time, the camera cut to a familiar face, the very first victim, the woman whose torment had played out in agonizing detail. Except now, she wasn't strapped to a chair. She was standing. Her clothes, once stained with blood, were gone, replaced with pristine white, her hair neatly combed. The bruises that had marred her body were erased as though they had never existed. But her eyes still held the same intensity, the same fear that had been burned into the minds of everyone watching. She stood in the middle of a room, identical to the one from the previous episodes, but there was no masked figure this time. There was only her. She opened her mouth, her voice raw and hoarse but clear. "You thought you were watching us," she said, her words slow, deliberate. "But we were watching you." The feed cut to another room, and another, and another. Each time a victim previously tortured in the show was now standing alive and whole, staring into the camera as though they could see the viewers directly. "We've been here all along," the woman continued, "and now, we're coming for you." The viewers at home felt their hearts freeze as their own cameras, hidden until now, panned around, slowly focusing on their terrified faces. One by one, their reflections flickered on the screen, no longer anonymous. The cold, clinical control room became a prison, and they had unknowingly locked themselves inside. Suddenly, the image of the woman on screen glitched. Her face twisted into something inhuman, her features stretching into a grotesque mockery of her former self. "We've seen you," the voice rasped from the speakers, barely human, "and now, you're part of us." A deafening silence followed. Then the final command flashed across the viewers' screens in blood-red text. "Vote to begin." There were no choices this time, only a single, pulsing button, "Start." Without thinking, some clicked it, while others stared in horror, paralyzed by the weight of their decisions. And then, the cameras in their room started recording again, but this time it wasn't just to watch. The tables had turned. Epilogue. The New Order. The live feed returned in full force, broadcasting to millions. But now the audience wasn't watching helpless victims. They were watching themselves. And as the realization sunk in, a collective shudder ran through every home tuned into the show. The masked man appeared one final time, a thin smile playing on his lips. "Welcome to the new season, dear viewers." The screen faded to black, but the cameras did not stop recording. The viewers were no longer hidden. The world was watching, waiting for what would happen next, and no one would ever know when their episode might begin. Like what you see? Hit like and subscribe, or you might just be the next story.